Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I thought I had finally put my tumultuous past behind me when I married my wife Jenny last year. But little did I know my insane ex-girlfriend Beth was about to resurface and turn our lives upside down all over again. Beth and I dated for about a year when we were both in college. At first, she seemed totally normal, even fun to be around. But it wasn't long before her true colors started to show. She became obsessively jealous if I so much as talked to another girl. She would call and text me dozens of times a day, freaking out if I didn't respond right away. She even showed up at my classes unannounced to check up on me. Her explosive temper also reared its ugly head frequently. We got into screaming matches over the most trivial things. Plates were thrown, furniture was smashed. It was a mess. I finally got the courage to break things off after she threatened to crash my car if she ever saw me with someone else. I thought I had escaped her for good. But when Jenny and I announced on social media that we were expecting our first child, the nightmare began again. One evening, someone buzzed our apartment intercom insistently. When I answered, I heard Beth's shrill voice screaming at me to come outside immediately. My blood ran cold. I told Jenny to stay inside while I went to confront her. "How could you get her pregnant?" Beth shrieked as soon as I stepped outside. "You know you belong with me." She was in near hysterics, her face twisted in anger. I tried calming her down, but she just kept ranting about how I had betrayed her. "I'm calling the police if you don't leave," I said firmly. At that, she reached into her purse and pulled out a huge kitchen knife. "If I can't have you, no one can," she seethed. "I'll cut that baby right out of her belly." I staggered back in shock, then ran inside to get Jenny. Beth tried forcing her way into the building, but I managed to slam the door shut and lock it. Jenny was terrified, sobbing uncontrollably. I immediately called 911 while keeping an eye on the security camera footage of Beth pacing menacingly outside. Within minutes, police sirens wailed in the distance. Beth realized she was cornered and tried to make a run for it, but two cops tackled her to the ground before she could escape. They found the knife still clutched in her hands. Beth was arrested and charged with aggravated assault, trespassing, and making terroristic threats. Jenny and I pushed for the harshest punishment possible. We even got a restraining order against her. At the trial, Beth tried to claim she was just joking around with the knife and would never have actually hurt Jenny. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Security footage clearly showed her deranged rage and death threats. The jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to several years in prison, but Beth continued to haunt us, even from behind bars. She wrote demented letters to Jenny gloating about the attacks she planned to commit once she got out. Prison officials had to monitor all her mail after that. With Beth's prison release looming, Jenny and I worried endlessly about our safety. Then I learned Beth was in the country illegally. She had overstayed her student visa years ago. I met with an immigration lawyer who helped me file paperwork to get her deported back to her home country after she finished her prison sentence. The day Beth was released, instead of coming after us, she was hauled away by immigration officers. She kicked and screamed but was powerless to stop her deportation. To be 100% sure she could never threaten us again, I sued Beth in civil court for the emotional distress her actions caused. The judge ordered her to pay a huge sum in damages. Not that we expected to ever see a dime. It was more about making sure she suffered complete financial ruin on top of everything else. The day we received notice of her deportation was one of the happiest of my life. The nightmare was finally over for real this time. Jenny and I could move on with our lives and raise our child in peace, without looking over our shoulders in fear. Beth's reign of terror was done for good. I learned to never ignore the red flags in a relationship, no matter how insignificant they seem at first. Beth's extreme jealousy and volatility should have been warning signs. I'm just thankful I got out in time and found a stable, loving partner in Jenny. And now with a baby on the way, I can close the door on my tumultuous past for good. Beth is someone else's problem now, and I intend to keep it that way. The next one is a pro-revenge story. A little backstory first. My older brother adopted me when I was 14. I lived with him, his wife, and her two children. One a couple of months older than me, the other a year older. I have never gotten along with the younger one. His mother and father went through a divorce, and both parents spoiled him rotten. His father owned several businesses, making around $1 million a year, so he's your typical entitled douchebag, who has always clashed with me, someone who grew up poor. This is the type of dude that kicked a dog we all raised from a 4-week-old puppy because she was excited to see him after not seeing him for 6 months. And she was jumping around. He's the type of dude that has ruined Thanksgiving because the milk was 2% instead of 1%, by screaming, yelling, and cussing everyone out at the age of 29. Now, on to the story. I was on a phone plan with his mother, but I lost my job, unable to pay the last $60 I owed her. But we had worked it out that I would pay her back on Thanksgiving by installing a stereo in my brother's, her husband's, new pickup. A little over a week ago, I was picking up Fallout 4 for a friend who was at work at the GameStop in the local mall. Nephew works across the little walkway and saw me walk in from outside where he was walking into work. While I'm in line, he comes in, cuts in front of everyone, and cusses me out, saying I shouldn't be buying games when I owe his mom money. I told him he needed to back the hell off and not talk about stuff he knew nothing about. He kept going on and on, running his mouth. I got my friend's game and walked out with him following me out the door. When I got to the door, he stopped ranting and went back to work with a smug look on his face. I lived with this guy for years, so I know him very well. When I hopped in my car, I realized he had parked in front of me and my dash cam was on. He sells weed out of his truck to supplement his low wages at the mall, and I remembered that he always showed up to work early to do so. I rewound my dash cam, and sure enough, you could clearly see him selling weed. I sent an email with the video of him selling the weed to the management of the mall from a new email address as a concerned citizen. 3 days later, while talking to my brother, he told me that my nephew got fired from his job and banned from the mall property. My response was, "That sucks. Enjoy not getting that unemployment check, a-hole." The next one is a petty revenge story. This is not my story, but my cousin's. He told me this while we were eating today, and I couldn't stop laughing from the outcome. Sorry in advance if my formatting is bad. Writing isn't my strong suit. I'll call my cousin Joe for this story. Joe lives in a small town between where I live and Tucson. He moved there in 2016 after graduating college the same year. For the most part, he lived quietly for a few years until early this year when his new neighbor, Karen, moved in. Joe described her as having the typical Karen look, but a little overweight. At first, she kept to herself, but would complain to all the neighbors about small things she found in their yards to nitpick, but nobody took it seriously. Joe mainly kept his distance from her, but that would change during the summer when he noticed a bunch of dog turds laying in his yard. Joe doesn't own a dog, but he has cameras that cover his house, so he went to take a look to see where they were coming from. It turned out it was Karen's dog when she would go for a walk. The camera clearly showed her stopping at the corner of his yard and letting her dog loose in Joe's yard to do its business. Joe went to her house and told her to stop letting her dog poop in his yard. She denied it until he told her he has cameras, and it caught the whole thing. Her defense was, "Well, your yard already looks like a dump, so it shouldn't bother you now." That pissed him off because he takes care of his lawn every week and doesn't take kindly to that. He told her that if she keeps letting her dog poop in his yard, he'll get the police involved, and he walked away. Not even a week later, he found more dog poop in the same spot, and Karen was on the camera letting her dog loose. He wasn't kidding about getting the police involved, and later that day, they came by and gave her a ticket for her dog pooping in other people's yards. Karen got pissed and came to Joe's house, telling him that he would be paying for the ticket. He politely told her to piss off and slammed the door on her. This didn't stop Karen from letting her dog poop on Joe's lawn, and every time he called the cops on her. This repeated 3 more times before Joe decided to take matters into his own hands and teach Karen a lesson. Joe had bought a water pellet gun from Walmart a few years prior and borrowed a full-body camo suit from a friend. He waited for a day when Karen would take her dog for a walk. That Tuesday at 3, she left for her run, and Joe set his trap. It didn't take long for Karen to come back, and right as she let her dog loose, a beagle, and it ran to the same spot, Joe emerged from his hiding spot and opened fire. He didn't hit the dog, but fired near it, causing it to run back. As Karen was about to curse Joe out, she realized he had her in his sights, and Joe opened up at her, hitting her in the chest, crotch, and rear as she ran. She called the cops, and it was the same ones who had ticketed her the previous times. When they saw the footage of what happened, they couldn't stop laughing as Karen was fuming at them. They then gave her another ticket and told her that if they had to come out there again, they would have animal control come out and take her dog away, as she clearly didn't learn her lesson the first time. When she asked why Joe was getting off free, they just said her dog was in his yard, and he was free to do as he pleased. From that day on, Karen avoided Joe and his yard. What got me laughing hard was what he said she was wearing, and the color of the water pellet he used. She was wearing spandex pants and a tank top that was 2 sizes too small and was white. The pellets were yellow. It looked like she pissed herself as she was running away to her house. My family and I were laughing after hearing this and couldn't top that with what else was going on with our own stories from the years, even mine about how someone thought I was too young to buy scratchers. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I worked for a petty, fragile man years ago. He loved to micromanage and always wanted to know if I had talked to anyone higher in management than he was. This, by itself, wasn't a problem, as I understood chains of command and followed them. The crux of the issue was that he had to know every detail of every conversation, and he wanted to dictate what they were told when they reached out to us. I was in a unique situation because I have specialized education, which was very useful to top management. Because of this, they called me directly, frequently, every day of the week, and at all hours. The baby boss had a huge problem with this because he wanted to control the technical information that I provided the big boss when he called with questions. I tried my best to loop baby boss in when these calls occurred, but big boss wanted me to speak freely and didn't want to wait for someone else to get on the call. Often baby boss would call big boss after we spoke to try and take credit for what I told them, even though it was well known that he didn't have the same education and understanding that I did. Baby boss then demanded that I call him every time big boss called me and wanted a full recounting of our conversations. Cue malicious compliance. I followed his directions to the letter. If big boss called me at 2 a.m. with a question, baby boss got a call at 2:15, but with a rambling retelling of our conversation, which often exceeded the length of the first call. After a few weeks, baby boss got tired, literally, of being woken up at all hours. He then demanded that I send him an email after every call with every detail, so I did that. I created these emails that would rival those of a high schooler who had an assignment with a minimum word count. I'd sprinkle the important information in between long, flowing sentences, so he was forced to read the whole thing, if he wanted to know what I really spoke about. This ultimately resulted in baby boss relenting and just asking for a brief recap in person during the next business day. Soon after, the budget people were very concerned about why I had huge amounts of overtime at odd hours, and I explained the direction I was given. Baby boss was eventually disciplined and was forced out, due in large part to everything that happened with me. The next one is an entitled People story. A friend, Jack, who is 36 years old, was invited to a wedding in the UK. The wedding was for Sophie, aged 35, and Jeff, aged 36. Jack is good friends with Jeff and has known him for a long time. The bride, Sophie, hails from the US. Jack RSVP'd to the wedding and was delighted that his girlfriend had also been invited, even though she didn't know the couple. A few months later, Jack received an email that read, "Thank you for RSVPing to our wedding, and thank you for helping us have the wedding of our dreams." At the bottom of the email, Jack noticed a link that said, "Click here for payment." He assumed this was a link to the honeymoon fund and continued with his day. A few days later, he decided to take a look to see where the link led. It took him to a payment page that requested just under £2,000 for attending the wedding. He suspected this might be a scam, so he called the wedding venue to inform them. The venue then told him, "Sophie and Jeff thank you for your contribution to enable them to have their dream wedding." But they only informed him of this after he had RSVP'd yes. Jack was astounded, but because he cared about his friend, he decided to empty his entire savings to attend the wedding. However, in hindsight, he realized that the invitation of his partner was probably not as generous as he had initially thought. Jack then felt that since he had spent so much money to attend, he would make the most of the free food and drinks, opting for the most expensive options. Fast forward to the wedding day, the drinks were not included. Jack and his partner had a couple of drinks, and the bill came to about £30. When they were checking out at the end of the wedding, Jack went to pay his bar bill. The bill amounted to £30, plus nearly £200 more. The venue then informed him that the bride and groom had requested that every guest be charged this additional amount as a tip for the venue. Note that this is in the UK, where tipping the venue is not a common practice, nor does charging guests for attendance, for that matter, but does that happen anywhere? Jack had no money left after emptying his savings for the wedding, so he had to negotiate a lower tip amount with the venue. After the wedding, Jack checked the cost of the venue and calculated that the cost had been spread among the guests, but not shared by the bride and groom. Essentially, they had a free wedding courtesy of their guests. Not only did the bride and groom pass on the costs of an exorbitantly priced venue to the guests after people had RSVP'd, essentially prioritizing the venue over guest attendance, but they also passed on the cost of a tip to the guests without informing them, treating it as a required charge during checkout. Jack had never heard of anything so entitled in his life. The next one is an entitled parent story. So this just happened today, at my work. I work at a petting zoo. There were 2 kids, 8 and 11, who came in and started terrorizing everyone here. They began saying every curse word under the sun to everyone, and harassed my animals by running after them and kicking them. One of my colleagues was taking a phone call, and the kids decided that she was a good target for some reason. This woman cannot handle confrontation. They started walking into her while she was sitting down and screaming in her ears. Eventually, she pushed them away and said, "Do you mind? I'm on a phone call." I was not present during this, but my colleague came to me distressed about the kids. I went to them and asked them again politely to leave. I had asked them before, but they did not leave. That was enough for the kids to stay out by the gate and scream and kick the fences. We told them to stop multiple times politely, but to no avail. Eventually, they circled around and threw stuff, unknown what it actually was, at my goats and sheep. They came back around and started bad-mouthing us yet again. Another one of my colleagues went to them and asked them to cool down. The profanity that came out of their mouths just shocked me. How can such young kids have such a vocabulary? I walked a little further away while I saw my colleague going for the hose. I knew what he was going to do. While I was inside, I heard the kids scream. Today was quite a hot day, 30 Celsius, 86 Fahrenheit, so I didn't think it was that bad what he did. The colleague came back with a big smile. I asked him what he did even though I already knew. He said he sprayed them, now they should be cooled down. He chuckled. They went away. Fast forward 20 minutes later, and the kids came back with their mom. She was so mad that she almost slammed the door into the kids' faces. Almost. I was already thinking this should be interesting. "Can you explain to me why my son came home crying?" she yelled. My colleagues and I looked at each other and they just started laughing. Even though I didn't laugh, I also found it quite funny. We explained to the mom what happened and she was not taking it. "You pushed my son to the ground, he's only 8, she yelled as she pointed to my female colleague from earlier. She was dumbfounded because she didn't push him to the ground but pushed him away. She explained it. The mom did not believe her. She demonstrated what she did with a colleague who was there. "That doesn't excuse you for touching my kid," Mommy said. My colleague stood up and walked away. She focused her attention on the other colleague. "And you?" She pointed at him. "You destroyed my son's bike while spraying them with water." This colleague does not take BS from anyone and said to her, "Do you want to know why?" "There is no excuse. You destroyed his bike," Mom said. This is where I jumped in because I had not been present for both those interactions, but no one talks to my colleagues like this. "So, what is broken?" I asked politely. "The battery," she huffed. I was already dumbfounded because a battery can take some water. "Does it work?" I asked. "Yes, but—" I interrupted her. "So nothing is broken." "That's not the point. He shouldn't have sprayed them with water," Mom said. "I understand your anger, ma'am, but your boys did ask for this," I said, trying to explain what the boys did in order for them to receive a hose. Mom did not like my reasoning because her son can't do anything wrong. I explained that actions have consequences. But nope, this action was uncalled for. I told her that her kids were really rude to me and my staff. Not only that, but the words they yelled at me and visitors around here were not welcome. "He would never say that. Our camera will say otherwise." At this point, she realized the cameras. "So you have proof that one of your colleagues attacked my kid and the other one used brute force, the water spraying, on them. I will get my husband here and he already has a criminal record, so you better watch your tongue." My male colleague talked down to the woman. "Respect is earned, and the way they are behaving, they do not get any respect." "Is that a threat? I ought to sue you for damage." I jumped back in. "I recall you said nothing broke." Well, if it does, I know where to find you, pointing at my colleague. This sounds like a threat, and we do not take kindly to threats, my colleague said. Is that a threat? She said. Take that how you will. They went back and forth, not going anywhere and repeating the same stuff over and over. Somewhere in the back and forth, the kid said, "What kind of petting zoo mistreats kids?" Eventually, I jumped back in again. The ones who deserve it. Mom turned her anger to me. I have a problem with your colleagues, the one who abused my kid and is secretly listening in and the one who hosed them. It is my problem if you threaten my colleagues. Fire them, the mom said. Excuse me? I was surprised by this response. You heard me, fire them, they both abused my kids. Ma'am, please leave, we aren't getting anywhere here, and your attitude towards my colleagues and me is not welcome here. Actions have consequences, do they not? Yes, ma'am, and so do yours. So this is your last chance before we call the police. This is the moment she realized she was not getting anywhere with us. While walking away, she screamed, I know you're open till 7.30, and my husband will come. None of us corrected her because we are open until 5, and this happened at 4.30. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.